The moment his ship touched the ground, the hunt began. Ethan Walker did not hear the sentence with his ears. He heard it through a damaged emergency receiver sputtering beside his crash seat. The voice lasted less than 2 seconds before dissolving into static, but it was enough to send a chill through him. He opened his eyes to a ceiling filled with warning lights. Red indicators flashed across cracked control panels. The cabin smelled like overheated circuits and burned insulation. Somewhere beneath the floor, a cooling fan struggled to stay alive. Ethan sat up slowly. Every muscle protested. Outside the fractured cockpit window, an unfamiliar sky stretched from horizon to horizon. 3 pale moons hung above distant mountains. Rivers of blue light flowed through forests that seemed to glow from within. Nothing looked remotely human. Nothing looked familiar. His ship had not merely missed its destination. It had missed an entire section of civilization. Ethan reached for the flight console. Most systems were dead. Navigation was gone. Communications barely functioned. Long-range scanners displayed nothing but corrupted symbols. The rescue engineer exhaled slowly. In his experience, panic was usually a waste of energy. Broken machines never repaired themselves because someone worried harder. He checked his emergency kit, collected a portable diagnostic tablet, and climbed toward the main hatch. The door opened with a groan. Warm air rushed inside. Ethan stepped onto the surface of an alien world for the first time in his life. The ground felt surprisingly normal beneath his boots. Dark soil. Soft grass. A gentle breeze. Birds, or at least something similar to birds, crossed the sky with glowing wings. For several moments he simply stood there. After surviving a crash that should have destroyed the ship completely, being alive felt almost suspicious. Then his wrist communicator activated. Static crackled across the speaker. A fragmented signal emerged. Confirm. More static. Human. Another burst of interference. Then the same sentence returned. Clearer this time. We found him. Ethan froze. The transmission ended immediately. No explanation followed. No coordinates. No identification. Just silence. He looked around instinctively. The valley appeared empty. Crystal trees swayed gently in the wind. Sunlight reflected from distant cliffs. Nothing moved. Yet the message remained lodged in his mind. We found him. Not a human. Him. As if someone had been searching for a specific person. As if someone had expected him to arrive. Ethan glanced back toward the damaged ship. That is not encouraging, he muttered. His communicator translated the sentence into 3 unrelated languages before shutting itself off again. The engineer began walking. Remaining beside a crashed vessel made little sense if someone was actively searching for him. He followed a narrow stream flowing through the valley. The water shimmered silver beneath the sunlight. Strange flowers illuminated the riverbanks with soft blue light. Everything felt beautiful. Everything felt wrong. An hour later he discovered evidence that changed everything. At first he thought the object was a rock formation. Then he realized it had been carved. Half buried beneath vines stood an enormous stone figure nearly 30 feet tall. Ethan stopped walking. The statue looked human. Not approximately human. Human. 2 arms. 2 legs. Human facial proportions. Human posture. Human clothing. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Slowly he approached. Weather and time had eroded many details, but enough remained visible to create a deeply uncomfortable question. Why would an alien planet contain ancient statues of human beings? Ethan examined the structure more closely. Symbols covered the base. He could not read them. Yet one detail stood out immediately. The figure's face carried an expression of calm determination. Not the expression of a conqueror. Not the expression of a ruler. More like someone helping carry a heavy burden. Ethan circled the monument. Additional statues emerged among the trees. Dozens of them. Some damaged. Some intact. All human. His pulse accelerated. The situation no longer resembled a simple crash landing. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed across the valley. Then another. Ethan turned toward the sound. Bright lights appeared far beyond the forest canopy. Aircraft. Several of them. Moving quickly. Searching. The realization arrived instantly. Whoever sent the transmission was getting closer. Ethan looked once more at the silent stone figures standing among the glowing trees. Then he started moving. Above him, the alien sky stretched endlessly across the horizon. Behind him, the hunt had already begun. The aircraft grew larger with every passing minute. Ethan Walker moved deeper into the forest, keeping the glowing river to his left while enormous crystal trees concealed him from the sky. Their trunks rose nearly 200 feet high, shimmering with veins of pale blue light beneath translucent bark. The entire forest seemed alive in ways he could not explain. Leaves glowed softly overhead. Strange insects drifted through the air like floating sparks. Somewhere in the distance, an unfamiliar animal called out with a sound that resembled a musical note carried by the wind. Under different circumstances, Ethan would have stopped to admire everything. Instead, he focused on staying unseen. The problem was simple. Someone knew he was here. Worse, someone appeared to have expected him. Every piece of evidence pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. The statues. The transmission. The search aircraft. None of it made sense. His wrist scanner remained unreliable, but it still provided occasional updates. Atmospheric composition was breathable. Temperature hovered near 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Local electromagnetic activity fluctuated wildly. That last detail explained why his communication systems continued failing. It did not explain why an entire planet seemed interested in one crashed engineer. Ethan reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley and immediately dropped into a crouch. Below him stretched a city unlike anything he had ever seen. Thousands of elegant structures curved upward from the landscape as though grown rather than built. Towers of silver crystal reflected sunlight across miles of gardens, waterways, and elevated walkways. Floating transports drifted silently between districts. Rivers of light crossed the city like glowing veins. The place looked less like an urban center and more like a living work of art. Ethan stared for several seconds. Then movement caught his attention. Several large display screens had activated above the city. Images appeared. His image. Ethan felt his stomach drop. The picture came directly from his ship identification records. His face rotated slowly above the skyline, while lines of alien text scrolled beneath it. He did not understand the language, but he understood the message. Somebody was looking for him. A lot of somebodies. Across the city, people stopped walking. Citizens looked upward. Conversations paused. Every screen displayed the same image. Ethan slowly lowered himself behind a rocky outcrop. "That is definitely not encouraging," he whispered. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, another pair of eyes watched the same broadcast. Lyra Vane stood inside the Strategic Observation Center high above the Capitol. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city below. Holographic displays floated throughout the room. Data streams moved constantly across transparent screens. Officers monitored transportation routes, communication networks, and search operations. The atmosphere felt unusually tense. At the center of the chamber, the image of Ethan Walker rotated above a projection table. Lyra studied the face carefully. The human looked ordinary. That detail bothered her. History described humans as dangerous anomalies. Influential. Unpredictable. Capable of altering entire civilizations. Yet the man displayed on the screen appeared more like a tired maintenance worker than a legendary threat. The director of planetary security entered the room. Silence followed immediately. Everyone straightened. Everyone listened. "Search teams have confirmed the crash site," the director announced. "The human survived." Murmurs spread throughout the chamber. Lyra remained silent. "Current projections indicate he is moving toward populated regions. Recovery remains the highest priority." Recovery. Not capture. Not elimination. Recovery. The wording mattered. Lyra noticed it immediately. "Sir?" she said. The director turned toward her. "Yes, Specialist Vane? Why is he so important?" The room became quieter. The director hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Because he must be found." Lyra frowned slightly. "That is not an answer." Several officers shifted uncomfortably. The director folded his hands behind his back. "Certain historical factors are classified. Even from the Strategic Observation Division? Especially from the Strategic Observation Division." The answer ended the discussion. Officially. Unofficially, it raised even more questions. Lyra looked back toward Ethan's image. For years she had studied forgotten civilizations, ancient records, and first contact events. Humans appeared throughout history like ghosts. Rare sightings. Fragmented reports. Half-erased legends. Yet no complete explanation ever existed. Now a real human stood somewhere beyond the city walls. Alive. And apparently valuable enough to mobilize an entire planet. The contradiction fascinated her. Hours later, Ethan continued moving through the wilderness. The sun had begun descending toward the horizon. Golden light filtered through crystal branches. Hunger reminded him that survival involved more than avoiding search teams. He needed water, shelter, and food. Preferably in that order. As he approached another section of the river, he noticed something unusual. Footprints. Fresh footprints. Not human. Humanoid. Narrower. Smaller. Several sets crossed the muddy riverbank before disappearing into the trees. Ethan examined them carefully. Whoever made them had passed through recently. Very recently. A sudden rustle sounded nearby. Ethan looked up. Nothing. Then he saw it. A pair of glowing eyes watching from the undergrowth. They vanished almost immediately. Another figure appeared farther away. Then another. Not predators. Observers. Someone was watching him. Someone intelligent. Ethan slowly stood. The forest grew quiet. The last sunlight reflected across the river. And for the first time since the crash, he realized a troubling possibility. The hunt might already be much closer than he thought. The eyes disappeared the moment Ethan focused on them. 1 second they glowed between the crystal roots. The next they were gone. Silence settled across the forest. Even the river seemed quieter. Ethan remained still for nearly a minute, listening. Years of rescue work had taught him something important. When an unfamiliar environment suddenly became silent, it usually meant someone was paying attention. The fading sunlight painted the forest in shades of gold and blue. Shadows stretched between towering crystal trunks. Somewhere overhead, glowing creatures drifted through the branches like floating lanterns. The entire world felt unreal. Yet the feeling of being watched was very real. Ethan slowly backed away from the riverbank. He did not run. Running without understanding the situation rarely ended well. Instead, he followed a narrow trail leading deeper into the wilderness. The footprints he discovered earlier continued in the same direction. Whoever had been observing him knew this forest far better than he did. The realization was not comforting. As darkness approached, Ethan began searching for a safe place to spend the night. His survival training recommended elevated positions whenever possible. High ground improved visibility and reduced unpleasant surprises. About 20 minutes later, he found exactly what he needed. A rocky outcrop overlooked part of the valley below. Crystal formations created a natural shelter against the wind. Nearby trees provided concealment from aerial searches. Most importantly, he could see approaching movement from almost every direction. Ethan settled beside the rocks and finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. The events of the day felt impossible. A crash landing. Ancient human statues. A city broadcasting his face across the skyline. Search teams combing the planet. Nothing about the situation resembled a random accident anymore. He activated his portable diagnostic tablet. The screen flickered weakly. Several files had survived the crash. Most had not. Ethan reviewed the available data. The navigation logs remained corrupted. Flight records ended shortly before the accident. Yet one file appeared partially recoverable. Curious, he opened it. Static filled the display. Fragmented images flashed across the screen. Star maps. Coordinates. System reports. Then a short audio segment emerged. The recording quality was poor. Voices drifted through layers of interference. Ethan increased the volume. Arrival probability. Static interrupted the sentence. Target world confirmed. More static followed. Ethan frowned. Then he heard the final words. Do not let them find him first. The recording ended abruptly. Ethan stared at the screen. A cold feeling settled in his chest. Somebody had known where he was going. Somebody expected him to arrive on this planet. Yet he had never heard of this world before the crash. None of it made sense. Before he could think further, movement caught his attention. Not far below the ridge, something small stumbled out of the trees. Ethan lowered the tablet. At first he assumed it was a local animal. Then he noticed the creature's behavior. It was trapped. One of its legs had become tangled in a network of glowing vines growing along the forest floor. The creature struggled repeatedly but only made the situation worse. It resembled a fox crossed with a deer, covered in silver fur that reflected the moonlight. Large blue eyes darted nervously through the darkness. Ethan hesitated. Search teams were already looking for him. Logic suggested avoiding unnecessary risks. Yet logic lost the argument almost immediately. He climbed down the ridge. The small animal noticed him and froze. Ethan raised both hands slowly. Easy, he said softly. I am not here to make your day worse. The creature clearly did not understand English. Fortunately, calm voices sounded similar in every language. Ethan approached carefully and examined the vines. The glowing strands had wrapped tightly around the animal's leg. Removing them required patience. Several minutes passed. Eventually the final strand loosened. The creature stepped backward immediately. Ethan expected it to flee. Instead, it remained where it was. Watching. Studying him. The same way everyone else on this planet seemed to. Then it made a soft chirping sound and disappeared into the forest. Ethan smiled despite himself. You are welcome. A voice answered from the darkness. That was unusual. Ethan froze. The voice belonged to a woman. Calm. Intelligent. Close. Much closer than he preferred. Slowly he turned. Standing between two crystal trees was the most striking person he had seen since arriving on the planet. Sapphire blue skin reflected the moonlight. Long silver-white hair moved gently in the evening breeze. Her dark uniform carried insignias he did not recognize. Most importantly, she was not surprised to see him. She had expected this meeting. Ethan's pulse quickened. The woman studied him carefully. Not with fear. Not with hostility. With curiosity. The same curiosity he saw in the ancient statues. The same curiosity hidden inside every unanswered question. For several seconds neither spoke. Then the woman folded her arms and looked directly into his eyes. Ethan Walker, she said. You are much harder to find than the legends suggested. Under the glowing alien moons, the hunt had finally caught up with him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Moonlight filtered through the crystal forest, painting silver reflections across the river and the surrounding trees. Ethan stood beside the place where the small creature had disappeared. The woman remained several yards away, calm and completely unafraid. That detail immediately caught his attention. Every sign on this planet suggested he was the center of a massive search operation. Yet the first person to actually find him looked more curious than triumphant. Legends? Ethan asked. The woman tilted her head slightly. That is the part that surprised you. Honestly, I have a list. To his surprise, a faint smile appeared on her face. It vanished almost immediately. My name is Lyra Vane. Ethan nodded cautiously. Ethan Walker. I know. Apparently everyone does. The quiet humor lingered between them for a second before reality returned. Ethan looked toward the dark forest surrounding them. So what happens now? Lyra did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied him. Her eyes moved from his damaged flight jacket to the portable diagnostic tablet hanging from his belt. Then she glanced toward the vines he had cut to free the trapped animal. You stopped to help it. Ethan followed her gaze. The little silver thing? Its name is a Lumen Runner. It looks stuck. You are currently the most searched individual on this world. I noticed. And you still spent 10 minutes helping a trapped animal. Ethan shrugged. It needed help. Lyra frowned slightly, as if the answer created more questions than it solved. The silence stretched. Somewhere high above, distant search aircraft crossed the sky. Their lights moved like tiny stars beyond the forest canopy. Ethan noticed Lyra watching them. Are those yours? He asked. Some of them. Should I be worried? Lyra considered the question carefully. That depends. On what? Who finds you first? Ethan stared at her. The answer was not comforting. Not even a little. He folded his arms. You know, everybody keeps saying things like that. Because it is true. Can someone explain why? For the first time, uncertainty appeared in Lyra's expression. Not fear. Not deception. Genuine uncertainty. I do not know. Ethan blinked. You do not know? No. Then why are you looking for me? Lyra looked toward the river. The silver water reflected the moons above. Because everyone else is. That answer somehow felt worse. Ethan sat down on a nearby stone. His entire body felt exhausted. The crash, the hike, the confusion, the constant questions. Everything had begun blending together. Lyra remained standing. You do not seem dangerous. Ethan laughed softly. I repair emergency systems for a living. Exactly. That is supposed to prove something? According to our historical records, humans change civilizations. Ethan looked up. By fixing things? Another small smile appeared. This time it stayed a little longer. Possibly. The conversation ended when a sudden pulse of light flashed through the trees. Lyra turned immediately. Her expression sharpened. Professional. Alert. Another pulse followed. Then another. Search beacons. They are getting closer, she said quietly. Ethan stood. Friends of yours? Not necessarily. That answer got his attention. Lyra activated a small device on her wrist. A holographic map appeared between them. Dozens of moving markers crossed the forest. Ethan recognized the pattern immediately. Search grids. Multiple teams. Multiple directions. Entire sections of wilderness were being covered at once. That seems excessive, he said. You are the first verified human to appear here in over a century. Ethan stared at the map. I keep hearing that word. Human? Verified. Lyra looked at him carefully. You really do not know, do you? Know what? Before she could answer, another signal appeared on the map. Then another. Lyra's expression changed instantly. Concern. Real concern. That is not good. Ethan stepped closer. What? Those teams are not supposed to be here. Meaning? Meaning somebody changed the search priority. The forest suddenly felt much smaller. Lyra closed the map. We need to move. Ethan did not argue. Something in her voice convinced him immediately. They left the river behind and headed deeper into the wilderness. Crystal trees towered overhead. Moonlight painted shifting patterns across the path. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Ethan noticed something unusual. Stone structures emerged between the trees. Ancient. Massive. Forgotten. The deeper they traveled, the more appeared. Towers. Archways. Broken monuments. And everywhere he looked, the same impossible detail repeated itself. Human figures. Human faces. Human statues. Hundreds of them. Some stood intact. Others had collapsed long ago. Yet all carried the same expression. Calm. Determined. Helpful. As if they had been remembered for what they gave rather than what they conquered. Ethan stopped walking. This is impossible. Lyra looked around the ruins. No. Her voice became unusually quiet. I think this is exactly what everyone is afraid of finding. Far above the ancient forest, searchlights swept across the night sky. And somewhere beyond the ruins, hidden beneath more than a century of secrets, the truth was finally beginning to wake up. The ruins stretched farther than either of them expected. Under the silver glow of the moons, ancient pathways wound between enormous monuments swallowed by centuries of crystal growth. Some statues stood nearly 50 feet tall. Others had collapsed long ago, their weathered faces staring silently toward the stars. Every one of them depicted humans. Ethan walked slowly through the forgotten city, unable to look away. The resemblance was too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Whoever built this place knew exactly what humans looked like. That fact alone rewrote everything he thought he understood about the planet. Lyra remained unusually quiet. She carried a portable scanner in one hand, occasionally checking readings while glancing toward the searchlights moving across the distant sky. The beams remained far away, but they were getting closer. Has anyone else seen this place? Ethan asked. His voice echoed softly between the stone structures. Lyra hesitated. Officially, no. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That sounds like an answer with a story attached. Most answers do. She stopped beside a fallen monument. Crystal vines covered half its surface. Ancient symbols ran across the base. Unlike the symbols Ethan had seen earlier, these appeared remarkably preserved. Lyra brushed away several glowing leaves and activated her scanner. Lines of text appeared above the device. Her expression changed immediately. What? Ethan asked. She looked up slowly. This monument is over 600 years old. Ethan stared at the statue. You are telling me people were building giant human monuments 600 years ago? Apparently. The answer lingered in the air. Neither knew what to do with it. They continued deeper into the ruins. The farther they traveled, the stranger everything became. Ancient buildings emerged from the darkness. Libraries. Gathering halls. Observation towers. Entire sections of the city appeared designed around human figures and human achievements. Ethan felt as though he had stepped into a forgotten chapter of history. Eventually they reached the largest structure in the complex. A massive circular building rose above the surrounding ruins. Its roof had partially collapsed, allowing moonlight to spill through enormous openings. Crystal trees grew through the walls. Nature and architecture had become inseparable. Yet despite the damage, the structure still radiated importance. What was this place? Ethan asked. Lyra studied the entrance. I think it was an archive. The word immediately caught Ethan's attention. Archives meant records. Records meant answers. Together they crossed the threshold. The interior stretched far beyond what either expected. Tier after tier of ancient storage chambers lined the walls. Crystal data columns filled the room. Most appeared inactive. Some were broken. Others still emitted faint traces of energy. The silence felt sacred, as though the building had spent centuries waiting for someone to return. Lyra approached the nearest archive terminal. Dust covered the controls. She activated the scanner again and connected it to the system. Nothing happened. Then a soft pulse illuminated the chamber. Ancient lights flickered awake one after another. Ethan watched as holographic symbols emerged above the floor. More lights activated. More systems awakened. The archive was coming back to life. That cannot be good for anyone trying to keep this place secret, Ethan said quietly. Lyra almost smiled. Then a voice echoed through the chamber. Not a living voice. A recording. Ancient. Calm. Archive access restored. The language shifted automatically through several dialects before settling into one Ethan's translator could understand. The voice continued. Welcome to the Human Accord Repository. Ethan and Lyra exchanged a look. Human Accord. Another impossible phrase. Another impossible clue. Data streams illuminated the room. Thousands of records appeared overhead. Historical images rotated through the air. Ethan looked upward and immediately froze. Humans. Everywhere. Human engineers. Human scientists. Human teachers. Human explorers. They stood beside alien citizens smiling for photographs taken centuries earlier. They worked together. Built together. Learned together. Nothing about the images suggested conflict. Nothing suggested fear. Lyra stared at the display in disbelief. Every official history she had ever studied described humans as dangerous anomalies whose influence destabilized civilizations. Yet the evidence above them told a completely different story. The archive continued loading additional records. One title appeared larger than the others. Founding Partners of Aetheris. Ethan read it twice. Then a third time. Founding? He whispered. Lyra looked equally stunned. That is impossible. The archive disagreed. New images appeared. Historical footage showed the earliest settlements of the planet. Alien pioneers stood beside human settlers. Together. Working as equals. Building cities. Developing technology. Creating infrastructure. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Someone had erased all of this. Not accidentally. Intentionally. Entire generations had been taught a different version of history. Before either could process the revelation, warning alarms suddenly echoed through the archive. Red symbols flashed overhead. Lyra immediately checked her scanner. Her expression hardened. We have a problem. Ethan already knew. Outside the building, distant lights moved through the forest. Search teams had finally reached the ruins. The truth hidden for centuries had just awakened. And now somebody was coming to make sure it stayed buried. The warning alarms echoed through the ancient archive like voices awakening after centuries of silence. Red symbols rotated above the crystal floor. Data streams flickered across the chamber walls. Outside, distant lights moved steadily through the ruins. Ethan stood beneath floating images of forgotten history and felt the weight of something much larger than himself settling onto his shoulders. The evidence surrounding him was undeniable. Humans had not been invaders. They had not been monsters. They had helped build this world. Yet somehow that truth had disappeared. Lyra moved quickly between archive terminals, her scanner collecting everything it could before the incoming search teams arrived. The glow from the holographic displays reflected across her sapphire blue skin as file after file transferred into secure storage. How much can you save? Ethan asked. Not enough, she replied. There are thousands of records. Another alarm pulse swept through the chamber. New information appeared above the central platform. The archive had detected external activity. Search groups were entering the outer district of the ruins. Ethan glanced toward the entrance. How long do we have? Lyra checked the display. Minutes. The answer hung heavily between them. Ethan looked back at the floating historical footage. Human engineers worked beside alien scientists. Human teachers stood inside classrooms filled with children from dozens of species. Human medical teams assisted entire communities. Every image contradicted the official stories. Someone worked very hard to erase all this, Ethan said quietly. Lyra nodded. And someone worked equally hard to preserve it. Her gaze shifted toward the center of the archive. A new hologram had begun to form. Unlike the other records, this one appeared larger and more detailed. The system seemed to be prioritizing it automatically. A figure emerged from the light. Human. Older. Wearing a simple utility uniform remarkably similar to Ethan's own rescue jacket. The recording stabilized. The man looked directly toward the viewer. Somehow, despite being centuries old, the message felt immediate. Personal. If you are seeing this, the recorded human began. Then history has failed. Ethan felt a chill run through him. The archive chamber became completely silent. Even the alarms seemed distant. The recording continued. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was one of the founders of the Human Accord. We came to Aetheris not as rulers, but as partners. Historical images appeared around him. Settlements. Construction projects. Scientific discoveries. Communities working together. For generations, our people helped build this world alongside our friends. We shared knowledge. We shared resources. Most importantly, we shared responsibility. Daniel paused. His expression grew more serious. But there were those who feared cooperation. Those who believed influence was a threat. They could not control a future built on trust. Lyra stared at the projection. Every word challenged everything she had been taught. If our history disappears, Daniel continued, remember this. Humanity was never important because of strength. Humanity mattered because when given a choice between power and service, the best among us chose service. Ethan looked away briefly. The statement felt strangely familiar. Like something he had always known without ever hearing spoken aloud. The recording reached its final moments. One day another human may return. If that happens, do not judge them by legends. Judge them by what they choose to do when nobody is watching. The image faded. Silence returned. Neither Ethan nor Lyra spoke for several seconds. Eventually Lyra exhaled slowly. That changes everything. Ethan looked toward the entrance where distant lights continued approaching. Not for everyone. The search teams were closer now. Their signals appeared clearly on the archive displays. Yet something unexpected caught Lyra's attention. Additional groups were moving toward the ruins from another direction. Smaller groups. Civilian identifiers. Scholars. Historians. Researchers. News networks. Information about the archive had already escaped containment. The truth was spreading. Lyra stared at the data in disbelief. Someone leaked the discovery. Ethan almost smiled. Maybe history wants to be found. Outside, activity intensified. Searchlights crossed the ancient city. Air transports hovered above distant structures. Yet the atmosphere felt different now. Less like a hunt. More like confusion. Questions were spreading faster than orders. The archive had survived centuries hidden beneath crystal forests, waiting for the right moment. Now that moment had arrived. Lyra finished transferring the final files and secured the archive copy. We should leave. Ethan nodded. Together they walked toward the exit. As they crossed the threshold, the first light of dawn appeared beyond the eastern mountains. Golden sunlight touched the crystal ruins. Hundreds of human statues emerged from the darkness, illuminated for the first time in generations. They stood silently among the trees, no longer forgotten. Ethan paused at the top of the archive steps and looked across the ancient city. Somewhere beyond the horizon, millions of people were beginning to question everything they believed about humans. And for the first time since crashing onto Aetheris, Ethan realized the search for him might never have been the real story. The real story was why an entire planet had been taught to forget. The news spread faster than anyone expected. By midday, every major communication network on Aetheris carried fragments of the archive discovery. Historians debated forgotten records. Scholars compared newly recovered documents against official timelines. Citizens gathered in public plazas staring at enormous holographic displays showing images that had remained hidden for centuries. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Ethan and Lyra watched part of the coverage from a remote overlook high above the valley. The crystal ruins stretched behind them, while the distant city shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. For the first time since his arrival, Ethan saw confusion replacing certainty. Entire generations had grown up believing one version of history. Now another version was appearing before their eyes. Neither fit together. Lyra lowered her scanner. The council has called an emergency session. Ethan sat on a flat stone overlooking the landscape. I assume that is unusual. Extremely. She paused. They rarely react this quickly. Ethan nodded. The speed itself revealed something important. The archive had touched a nerve. Powerful people were worried. Before Lyra could continue, her wrist communicator activated. Several messages appeared simultaneously. Her expression shifted as she reviewed them. Concern replaced curiosity. What happened? Ethan asked. Lyra looked toward the city. Something is wrong with the planetary energy grid. Ethan immediately paid attention. Technical problems were a language he understood. How serious? Major distribution failures are spreading across 3 regions. Ethan stood. Power stations? No. She zoomed into the report. Relay towers. His expression tightened. Relay towers formed the backbone of any advanced infrastructure system. Communications. Transportation. Environmental controls. Emergency networks. If enough failed simultaneously, entire sections of civilization could become isolated. More alerts appeared. Then more. The problem was escalating. Ethan reviewed the incoming data. Even from a distance, certain patterns stood out. The failures were spreading outward from central transmission hubs. That was not random. It resembled a cascade event. One failure creating another. Then another. The sort of technical chain reaction engineers hated. Do they know the cause? He asked. Lyra shook her head. Not yet. Ethan looked toward the horizon. Hundreds of miles away, faint flashes of light appeared near one of the major relay networks. Even from this distance, the disruption was visible. His instincts immediately began working through possible solutions. Diagnostic procedures. Containment protocols. Emergency stabilization methods. Then he remembered something important. He was technically the most searched person on the planet. Helping might not be wise. Unfortunately, wisdom and conscience rarely agreed with each other. Another alert appeared. This one carried casualty projections if critical systems remained offline much longer. Ethan stopped reading. He already knew enough. We need to go. Lyra looked at him carefully. You realize those facilities are full of officials searching for you. Probably. You could leave instead. Ethan almost laughed. Leave and go where? She did not answer. Both knew the truth. The crash had stranded him here. More importantly, people needed help. The decision had already been made. An hour later they arrived at one of the affected relay stations. The facility rose from the landscape like a silver tower reaching toward the clouds. Engineers crowded around diagnostic terminals. Emergency crews moved between equipment platforms. The atmosphere felt tense but focused. Everyone was working. Nobody was panicking. Yet nobody seemed to understand why the failures continued spreading. Ethan observed the situation quietly. Something felt familiar. He approached one of the main monitoring displays. Data streamed across the screen. Frequency instability. Synchronization errors. Feedback amplification. His eyes narrowed. That cannot be right. An engineer nearby turned toward him. Recognition appeared immediately. You! Ethan ignored the reaction and pointed toward the display. These synchronization buffers were never recalibrated after the atmospheric fluctuations. Several technicians exchanged confused looks. How do you know that? Ethan zoomed into the system architecture. Because the relay network is compensating for conditions that no longer exist. Silence followed. Then another engineer checked the historical maintenance records. Her eyes widened. He is right. Suddenly everyone started moving. New diagnostics were launched. Additional systems came online. Ethan found himself standing beside people who only hours earlier had probably been searching for him. Nobody cared anymore. The problem mattered more than the politics. Lyra watched everything from a distance. The scene reminded her of the archive recording. Humanity was never important because of strength. Humanity mattered because when given a choice between power and service, the best among them chose service. Ethan never asked who was in charge. Never demanded anything. Never mentioned the search. He simply helped. Hours passed. Gradually the network stabilized. One relay after another returned to normal operation. Communication systems recovered. Transportation grids synchronized. Emergency alerts began disappearing. As evening settled across Aetheris, cheers erupted throughout the facility. The crisis was ending. Ethan stepped away from the monitoring station and looked toward the sunset. Golden light reflected from the relay tower. Nearby engineers celebrated their success. For a brief moment, nobody viewed him as a mystery, a legend, or a target. They saw exactly what he was. A man solving problems because they needed solving. Yet far beyond the relay station, hidden inside government archives and secured communication channels, another realization was spreading. The human from the stars had just done exactly what the forgotten records said humans always did. And that frightened some people far more than any legend ever could. The relay station remained busy long after the crisis ended. Engineers reviewed diagnostics. Technicians verified system stability. Communication channels across Aetheris slowly returned to normal operation. Yet the most important change was not happening inside the equipment. It was happening inside people's minds. For the first time in generations, citizens had watched a human solve a problem instead of creating one. The difference mattered. Ethan noticed it in the way people looked at him. The suspicion was fading. Curiosity remained. Respect was beginning to appear. Lyra noticed it too. They left the relay station shortly after sunset and traveled toward the capital aboard a transport vehicle provided by the engineering team. Through the window, endless crystal fields reflected the moonlight. Cities glowed on the horizon like clusters of stars scattered across the surface of the world. Neither spoke much. The events of the day carried their own weight. Eventually Lyra broke the silence. "The council requested your presence." Ethan looked up from the maintenance tablet he had been studying. "Requested?" That was the exact word. "That sounds slightly better than hunted." A faint smile appeared on her face. Slightly. The transport continued across the landscape. As they approached the capital, Ethan noticed something unusual. Public displays throughout the city no longer showed search notices. Instead, they displayed historical images recovered from the archive. Human settlers. Alien pioneers. Joint expeditions. Educational programs. Partnerships. Entire crowds gathered beneath the screens. People stopped to watch. Some looked confused. Others looked emotional. Most looked thoughtful. The truth was spreading faster than anyone could stop it. When they finally arrived at the council complex, the atmosphere felt very different from the city outside. Massive crystal towers rose into the night sky. Security personnel stood along illuminated pathways. Officials moved quickly through the corridors. Everyone seemed aware that history itself had shifted. Ethan and Lyra entered the central chamber together. The room was enormous. Circular seating surrounded a transparent floor beneath which rivers of blue energy flowed like liquid light. Representatives from every major region of Aetheris filled the chamber. Some studied Ethan openly. Others focused on the archive evidence displayed above the assembly. The session had already begun. An elderly council member stood near the center platform. Her voice echoed throughout the chamber. "The recovered archives have been verified." Murmurs spread immediately. The woman continued. "The records are authentic." More voices followed. Questions. Arguments. Doubts. Concerns. Yet one reality remained impossible to ignore. The evidence was real. Ethan remained near the rear of the chamber, listening. He had no desire to become the center of political debates. Unfortunately, events had other plans. Another council member activated a display. A new archive record appeared overhead. Unlike previous files, this one carried special classification markers. Lyra leaned forward. "I have never seen that designation before." The chamber grew silent as the recording began. The image showed a conference held centuries earlier. Human representatives stood beside alien leaders. Historical figures. Founders. Architects of the original partnership. Then the recording focused on a document displayed at the center of the room. A charter. A founding agreement. The translation system processed the text. One sentence appeared above the assembly. The last human accord. Ethan frowned. The title felt familiar somehow. The recording continued. An alien founder addressed the audience. Should our partnership ever disappear from memory, a safeguard has been established. More text appeared. The chamber watched in complete silence. The descendants of the human accord shall remain guardians of the founding principles. If one returns, they shall carry the authority to restore what history has lost. Ethan felt every eye in the room turn toward him. The recording was not finished. Additional information appeared. Genetic markers. Family records. Historical lineage maps. The archive system compared the data against Ethan's identity. Confirmation symbols illuminated the chamber. Match confirmed. Descendant verified. The room became completely silent. Ethan stared at the display. Lyra looked equally stunned. That is impossible, she whispered. Yet the archive insisted otherwise. The truth unfolded piece by piece. Ethan was not important because he crashed here. He was not important because he was human. He was important because he belonged to the final recorded lineage of the original Human Accord founders. Centuries ago, someone had built a safeguard into history itself. If the truth was ever buried, a future descendant could help uncover it again. The coincidence felt impossible. Yet here he stood. A rescue engineer from Earth. Stranded on an alien world. Exactly where the archives predicted someone like him would eventually appear. The council chamber erupted into discussion. Some representatives looked amazed. Others looked deeply uncomfortable. Powerful assumptions were collapsing in real time. Ethan barely heard any of it. His attention remained fixed on the final words of the archive record. Humanity was never meant to rule Aetheris. Humanity was meant to remind it of what it once believed. As the debate continued around him, Ethan finally understood why everyone had been searching for him. Not because he was dangerous. Not because he was powerful. They were searching for him because somewhere deep beneath centuries of forgotten history, an entire planet had been waiting for proof that its better future was real. The council debate continued long into the night, but Ethan barely heard most of it. Representatives argued over policy. Historians compared records. Scholars discussed the implications of the Human Accord. Yet the answer to the biggest questions seemed surprisingly simple. The truth had returned. What happened next depended on what people chose to do with it. By sunrise, the city felt different. Citizens filled public squares. Archive recordings played openly across communication networks. Ancient photographs once hidden from history now appeared everywhere. Children pointed at images of humans and aliens working side by side. Elderly citizens sat quietly watching records they never knew existed. The mood was not anger. It was reflection. Entire generations were reconsidering what they believed. Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the capital as the first light of morning touched the crystal towers. Beside him, Lyra watched the city awaken. Neither spoke for a while. The view itself said enough. You changed everything, Lyra said finally. Ethan smiled faintly. I crashed a ship. You did more than that. He leaned against the railing. The archives changed everything. Lyra looked toward the horizon. The archives needed someone willing to find them. For a moment neither added anything else. Some truths felt complete on their own. Later that day, the council convened one final session. This time the atmosphere was entirely different. There were no emergency alerts. No arguments. No uncertainty. The representatives had reached a decision. Ethan entered the chamber alongside Lyra and immediately noticed hundreds of citizens watching from the public galleries above. News networks broadcast the proceedings across the planet. The elderly council leader who had spoken the previous day stepped forward once more. For 142 years, she began, our world remembered only part of its own story. The chamber remained silent. Today that changes. New archive footage appeared overhead. Images of cooperation, discovery, friendship, shared achievement. The forgotten foundations of Aetheris. The human accord shall be restored to the historical record. Applause echoed throughout the chamber. Not loud. Not dramatic. Genuine. The kind of applause people offer when something finally feels right. The council leader continued. Furthermore, all archive materials shall become publicly accessible. No history will be hidden again. More applause followed. Ethan glanced toward Lyra. She smiled. The moment felt larger than politics. Larger than history. It felt like healing. Then the council leader looked directly at Ethan. There remains one final matter. The chamber quieted immediately. Ethan suspected he knew what was coming. Ethan Walker, descendant of the Human Accord founders, the council offers you permanent citizenship within Aetheris and a position as advisor to the Restoration Initiative. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Ethan stood silently for a moment. The offer was generous, meaningful, unexpected. Yet another reality remained waiting for him. Somewhere beyond the stars, Earth still existed. His damaged ship could eventually be repaired. Home was still out there. The council leader seemed to understand his hesitation. You do not need to answer immediately. Ethan nodded gratefully. The session concluded shortly afterward. Citizens filled the streets. Celebrations appeared across the city. Music drifted through the air. Conversations echoed between crystal towers. Yet Ethan found himself returning to the place where everything began. The crash site. The damaged ship remained exactly where he left it. Engineers had already started helping with repairs. New components rested beside the hull. Diagnostic systems blinked steadily. Progress was being made. Lyra joined him near sunset. Together they stood beside the vessel watching golden light spread across the valley. You could leave, she said quietly. Ethan looked toward the horizon. I could. And? He smiled. I spent most of my life fixing things. Lyra waited. This world still has a few things to fix. The answer made her laugh softly. Not because it was surprising. Because it was exactly what she expected. Days later, the first restoration projects began. Historical districts reopened. Educational programs updated their curriculum. Archive researchers worked around the clock. Engineers rebuilt forgotten infrastructure originally designed through Human Accord cooperation. Everywhere Ethan traveled, people greeted him differently than before. Not as a legend. Not as a mystery. Simply as a person. Someone willing to help. One evening, long after the celebrations ended, Ethan and Lyra returned to the ancient ruins where the archive had been discovered. The crystal forest glowed beneath the stars. Moonlight illuminated the silent statues standing among the trees. They no longer felt forgotten. They felt remembered. Ethan looked at the nearest monument. The weathered human face gazed peacefully toward the sky. Centuries earlier, someone built these monuments to honor an idea. Not a species. Not a hero. An idea. Lyra followed his gaze. What do you think they wanted people to remember? Ethan considered the question carefully. Then he looked toward the stars above Aetheris. The same stars that watched over Earth. The same stars that connected every world. That being human was never the important part. Lyra tilted her head. Then what was? Ethan smiled. The answer felt obvious now. Choosing to help when you do not have to. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. Meaningful silence. Above them, starlight reflected across crystal leaves. And for the first time in more than a century, Aetheris was no longer searching for a human. It had finally remembered humanity.